Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. You are at the Transforming Power of Systems, brought to you by the Center for Christian Life Enrichment as a part of our Wednesday webinar series, the ABCs of CLE. Today, Rich Blue will be presenting for you. He's going to be talking about the Transforming Power of Systems. But before he does that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about our center. The Center for Christian Life Enrichment is located in the northern suburbs of Chicago. Among our 5 therapists, we have over 50 years of experience. We are an emotionally focused practice and value feelings, and we operate on the cutting-edge blend of psychology and Christian principles. Today's presenter, Rich Blue, is the founder of the Center for Christian Life Enrichment, an ordained minister. He's been practicing in the field of psychology for more than 25 years and also has a history with Campus Crusade for Christ. And so now I'll turn it over to Rich, and he will talk to you about the Transforming Power of Systems.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Well, it's so good to have all of you with us today. We have an exciting topic, and the topic is about understanding the power of systems. All of life is a function and operates within systems, but most of us are used to looking at life through the lens of an individual. We look at life through our own eyes and fail to recognize the fact that we are in and a part of systems all the time. So this whole concept of thinking from a systems perspective was something that really came to my attention about a year or two ago. I was in my graduate school, and I was talking about one of the interactions that I had had with a family that I was working with. And I was excited about it, and I thought it had gone really, really well. And I was talking about this time we had spent in a session where one of the kids was really being difficult and acting out, and the parents had been having lots of trouble dealing with him. And so in an effort to try to be what I thought was helpful, I ended up getting into kind of a confrontation with this young man and getting him eventually to come around to cooperating and behaving more in a manner that he should behave. And so I felt pretty proud of myself and thought that I had done a good job modeling to the parents how to deal with the kid. So much to my surprise, as I was presenting this instance as an example of what I was doing in one of my classes for system theory, my supervisor, one of the professors, just interrupted me and said, "Well, it's a nice thing that you did, but it has nothing to do with systems." And you can imagine how shocked and embarrassed I was at that point. But what really opened my mind, opened my eyes in that situation, was the fact that I really did not understand what he was talking about. Now, in graduate school, I had taken courses on family systems. I had been operating with family system type principles for years. But what was really missing was that though I understood it conceptually, I did not realize that I was actually part of that system. And so when I was working with that family, even though in my mind I was trying to approach this because we were meeting as a family from a systems perspective, I was really doing nothing different than I would if I was meeting with an individual. So this was a transformative moment for me, which caused me to look at systems from a very, very different standpoint and begin to recognize that there was tremendous power. And here's what motivates me about systems theory, is that my life is about the process of me transforming myself and supporting the people around me to transform their lives. And if I simply make changes to my individual life and do not at the same time attempt to change or transform the systems that I'm a part of, what I will find is that eventually the system is more powerful than any given individual. And ultimately, in the end, I will conform to the power of the system. And this was the heart of what happened in the beginning of family therapy. Counseling centers would be working with kids that were in tough neighborhoods, tough families, difficult situations, have very effective interventions with them when they would come into the counseling center. But then they would go home and return once again to their family and their environment And whatever gains might have been experienced in the counseling center were lost in that moment. And so I began to realize that if we're really going to have an effect on a person's life, especially a young person's life, we're going to have to somehow address the system that they are a part of. So what I'd like to talk about in this today is to look at what are the 6 components of family systems. And first is that they have interrelated elements and structure. The elements of a system are the members of each family in a family system kind of concept. Each element has characteristics, they relate to each other, and there's a certain structure that the group has. You can isolate the individual and look at them as the role they might play, but that role is within a system. And so I think a perfect analogy of this is like a team. And for example, we look at a baseball team. So the system is the entire baseball team. On that team, you have individual athletes with varying degrees of skill and ability and maturity. Some of those skills are specialized for that particular sport or that particular team. So the skills needed for baseball vary from the skills, for instance, that would be needed for football. So if we look at athletic teams, the larger structure is team, and then a substructure would be athletic team, and then a specific type of athletic team would be a baseball team. So in the baseball team system, you have these different athletes who all have a primary position, yet are able to play other positions if the team, the system, needs that. They're arranged in a lineup, for instance, in baseball, a batting order, and they're interdependent. All are dependent on one another to fulfill their responsibility. A team will not do well if one person is exceptional. For instance, the pitcher has a great game, but no one can hit or no one can handle fielding balls in the field. Individual breakdowns result in team breakdowns. So when you think of a system or a family system, you want to think of each individual who has their own specific function, role, skills, personality, yet they are in a dependent relationship with the other people on their team. So the second component of a family system is that people in systems interact in patterns. There are predictable patterns of interaction that emerge in a family system. And these cycles repeat themselves, and they provide some of the equilibrium and the stability that the system is looking for. Systems seek stability. It's one of the distinctive characteristics of families, and we're going to talk more about that later on. The third thing is systems have boundaries. And boundaries determine sort of like who is in and who is outside the system. So when we think of a family system, one of the characteristics that we look at is how open or closed is the system. Every system has ways of including and excluding elements so that the line between those within the system and those outside the system is clear. We look at boundaries range from being open, which would be, similar to being confluent or, those types of things, to very closed. Closed boundaries tend to be rigid. There's hard barriers that determine who is inside and who is outside the system. So when you're looking at a system, one of the things you want to recognize and begin to look for is how open versus closed are the boundary systems in a system. Closed boundary systems isolate their members from the environment, and it seems isolated and self-contained. And no family system is either open or it's closed. It's some measure of both, and sometimes what you will find in certain areas it's more open than in others. The next characteristic of family system is that the concept of synergistic. And we get from Gestalt therapy that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Every family system, even though it's made up of individual elements, results in an organic whole. overall family images and themes are reflected in that holistic kind of quality. Unique behaviors may be ascribed to the entire system that don't appropriately describe individual elements. When we think of synergy, most often it refers to the phenomenon of two or more discrete influences or agents acting in common to create an effect which is greater than the sum of the effects each is able to create independently. This is very important. This is why, from the beginning in our evolution and development, we strive to collect relationships, to form tribes, to form communities. We recognize, like here at CLE, one of the things we spend a lot of time in groups. We recognize the synergistic power of groups, where you can accomplish things and experience things that far outweigh what any combination of individuals could do on their own. Teamwork ends up resulting in things being better than any individual effort can accomplish. The next thing is that within systems, they use messages and rules to shape members. Systems seek conformity. Systems want their members to follow the same rules and same messages. Now, the fundamental system that each of us initially was exposed to was our families of origin. And when you think about most of the expectations, the rules, the beliefs, the values were implicit versus explicit. They were often unspoken, and yet there was a repetitive and redundant nature. The system strives to get its members to conform to their expectations. So that they use guilt, all different kinds of ways to control behavior and ensure conformity. So the last characteristic that I want to look at, the component of a family system, is that each system has subsystems. And if we look at the system of a family, one of the things that there are three primary subsystems. So you have the marital system, which is the couple. You have the parental system, which is mom and dad. And then you have the siblings. Now within that, you find there may be other subsystems based on gender, based on age. You have grandparents. There's lots of different things. But to remember, within every system, there are subsystems. Now, on this next slide, what you'll see is some of the characteristics of family systems that I have found most helpful in being able to notice, to see, and to understand the system. And the first is that systems are organized to maintain homeostasis. Now, we just talked about that previously, about systems seeking conformity. Systems want to maintain the status quo. If you think about it in an evolutionary perspective, any kind of threat, anything that's different to an existing system is perceived as a threat. And so systems work to try to ensure and maintain the status quo, the way things have been. This is why family rules and beliefs are so valuable and so important to a family system. Now that can be to the extent that the values and beliefs are helpful and life-producing, that's wonderful. But to the extent they're not, they do great damage. And there are counterbalancing forces. There are dynamic tensions that exist within a system. And as a system tries to maintain itself, to maintain homeostasis, it's like a teeter-totter. So for instance, one of the common forces that exists is the tension between, within a family, the need for individuality and the need for togetherness. And in a healthy family, you see this balance work itself out, where you have individuality. People have needs to be independent, be on their own, to be self-thinking. And then on the other side, there's a need for people to feel together. And when these get out of balance, when you go too far one way or too far the other way, then you can see common problems in a family system. go too far to the individuality emphasis and that kind of force or tension, then what you get is detachment, that people become isolated, insulated, and disconnected from each other. So they undermine the power of the system. If you go too far on the togetherness continuum, what you get is enmeshment. And enmeshment is that unhealthy closeness where the boundaries between individuals get blurred and they get merged. So common examples with this, well, you'll see fathers dealing with getting enmeshed with their kids, for instance, in sports. You'll see moms getting a tendency to be enmeshed in their daughter's social lives, or just, basic kind of generalization. So first characteristic is the system is going to seek to maintain itself as it is. And it assumes the way things have always been are better, they're safer, and they're preferred. So the next characteristic is systems resist change. So I think you see how that relates to the urge for the system to maintain homeostasis. Is it's going to see any change as a threat. It's going to perceive it as bad, and inside it's going to announce danger signals. When something new or different is proposed to the system, to the family, there is a natural tendency to resist. So I think of this in the illustration of like a deer. If you notice in nature, deers are animals where their primary defense mechanisms involve either fleeing or freezing. They're not fighters. And so when a deer goes through the way they live, when you monitor their nature, they follow the same paths, they go to the same areas, they like everything familiar and predictable. And when they notice that something is different, for instance, the wind breaks a branch in a storm, it falls across one of their normal paths, and they see that branch there, they are alarmed. They're concerned. Something is different. Their mind may not, I don't know exactly what their mind concludes, whether, what it thinks about, but I do know that what it triggers is their alarm system. And they're looking for how, at that point, what are they going to need to do? Does it make more sense for them to freeze, or does it make more sense to flee? This same kind of sense, anytime you are dealing with a system that you're a part of, or a system that you're trying to help somebody else deal with, you have to know that the system itself is going to fight to maintain things the way they are, and will initially be threatened by any attempt to change that system. Okay, third characteristic is that within every system, members, like baseball players, have roles, or what we would say in baseball is they play positions. So in a family, when you think about your family, or you think about a system that you're in at work, what you can do is to begin to identify and examine what are the roles that people are playing in this system. Now, I'm going to talk about this in a second in my point of how do we intervene in family systems. But one of my professors got his PhD from Yale in anthropology. And when he was supporting me in learning how to shift from the mindset of being kind of an individual therapist to being an effective systems therapist, what he began to do was give me books talking about how anthropologists researched and entered new communities, tribes, and different kinds of things where no, like North American, had ever been before. And this image, as a result of reading and discussing those things, what I began to do is imagine when I was working with a new family, I imagined being in a tree fort, like 50 feet off the ground, overlooking this village, and beginning to, I couldn't understand what people were saying. All I could do was observe and to begin to try to deduce and make inferences, have guesses about the functions of people's behavior. And so when you look at a family, and I'm going to talk about that more in a minute, but just in terms of this idea is to realize within systems, people have roles. They have functions that they do. Traditional roles in family systems where you usually have the firstborn, so there's a birth order component, but firstborn is often the family hero, the one that's excessively responsible, tends to do the thing, to do the right thing. Another role is a placater. This is the person that is the people pleaser. They're the person that wants to have everyone get along, really is uncomfortable with conflict, and is constantly trying to smooth things over. You get the scapegoat, that's the one that acts out, the one that most people in the system get angry at. Lost child, there's usually someone that's hidden, often the middle child, hidden in the middle of the family. All they do is adjust and accommodate, very low maintenance. And then the mascot, often the youngest, is the kind of the cheerleader, the one that's just funny and gets all the attention. But those are simply examples in the family system of traditional roles that exist within that system. A couple other characteristics is that when there is stress and anxiety and conflict in a system, what people will do is triangle. Now, Murray Bowen was one of the early researchers and considered by some to be the founder of family therapy. Triangles were a big thing that he observed. When conflict or tension exists between two people, what would happen is that they would pull in a third person. The relationship, the communication would break down between individuals, and those individuals would then go to another person, and triangles were one of the common things you saw in systems to cope with anxiety. And obviously, one of the things that we would do in a family system is attempt to mediate and get people to work on their one-on-one relationship and not complicate them by drawing in a third party. The last characteristic I want to talk about before we go into just talking through simple tips on intervening is that crisis, it creates an opening for change in systems. It usually involves something catastrophic. Maybe it's a loss, it's a death, someone losing their job, something major. But the interesting thing that happens in the system is it opens the door temporarily for things to be able to shift and change. And so one of the nice things about doing family therapy and working with it, often people are coming in for help when something traumatic has happened, and there's a wonderful opportunity for the system to change before it locks back in and the principles of homeostasis take over. So the next slide is intervening in family systems, strategies for lasting transformation. Here's the biggest thing, is you first have to observe and assess. This is so hard for me. I want to get in and fix. I want to get in and give advice, say, oh, do you see you're doing this, doing this. One of the biggest things is observe and assess, and assess. You don't want to obsess, but I do that too. You observe and assess, and this is where one of the critical tools is you begin to ask questions of the family system, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So first, observe and assess. Second, you have to think system. You have to be that psychosocial anthropologist. That's what I picture myself on, to get myself in that mindset. I'm in that tree fort, I'm in that platform, looking down on this, trying to manage and contain my assumptions, and just move forward with looking at the system, not getting lost in the individual. It's like watching baseball and not just focusing on the pitcher or focusing on the batter, but at the same time observing every other player on that team. Third is you ask system-based questions. And the critical thing you want to do is you want to ask, what is the function of that behavior in the system? You don't want to get lost with the particular individual. You want to say, what is the function of that individual behavior? How is what they are doing serving the system? How is the system expressing and addressing its needs through that individual? And I want to just close with an example of that, is that when you look at one of the family systems that I was working with, one of the things that happened is that one of the kids began to express some upset and started acting out in different areas in terms of, they began struggling with restricting food, and then began breaking rules and compliance types of things. And as we began to look at the family system, what that child was doing was actually expressing the upset. It was like an alarm going out, expressing an upset of the system because the relationship with mom and dad was breaking down. And as we began to, just through the process of getting people talking, teaching them to think from a systems perspective, looking at the whole instead of just the parts, they begin to recognize that this was a symbolic strategy where it was like a cry for help, saying, we need help in our system. Now the help actually, the individual child itself did not need help as much as the parents did. Once we began working on the parents, strengthening their relationship and connecting together, suddenly the symptoms in the child began to reduce, and she was able to begin to get back on track and address her own issues and what was going on. So another question is, how is stress and tension being expressed in a family system? And, you know, most often it's going to manifest itself in one of four ways. Marital conflict, one or both of the spouses will begin to break down, the children break down, and people start to isolate and insulate from each other. So the critical thing you want to do when you think about it, you want to observe and obsess, think in a systems perspective, ask system-based questions, and then you want to intervene. And you want to intervene, come in, draw attention to something, and then get out. Let the system, empower the system to transform itself. We support the system to make changes, and as a result, we know that the individual themselves change. So what we'd like to do is just thank you very much for joining us in this webinar. You have before you some slides that are just explaining how you could contact us. All the information is there. You know, my email, rich.blue@cle.us.com. Please contact us if you have comments, if there's anything that you would like to do or say about some of the stuff we talked about. We'd love to hear from you. If by chance you would like to take advantage, we're offering a complimentary 30-minute consultation with me or one of my staff. And if you call us or contact us with email, we're on Facebook, Twitter. I think you see all of that there. There's millions of ways to contact us. We would love to hear from you and love to share with you about what we're doing here and tell you about the exciting work that's happening in the CLE community. I also want to invite you to our next webinar that's going to be on Wednesday, September 5th at 11:30. And the title is going to be The Art of Meaningful Conversation. And one of our therapists, Andrew Mercer, will be leading that discussion. And we would love to have you join us for that. And the link for that is on the slide in front of you. So thank you very much for joining us. It was great being with you, and look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you.